Welcome to the Natural History Institute. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Jessie Rack, and I'm the program director here. And before I introduce tonight's speaker, a couple of quick announcements. So just FYI, the restrooms and water fountains are around the corner to the back if you need them, on the other side of that wall. I also want to remind you really quick that we are a 501c nonprofit, and we exist because of your support. If you like what you see tonight and the other workshops and speaker series, field experiences that we offer, please help us keep doing it. Help us keep the lights on. We have a little fishbowl up front with your name on it. Well, it's our name, but thank you. So a couple of upcoming events that you might be interested in. So next month, our speaker series will host our own science director, Dr. Lisa Floyd-Hanna, who will present a talk entitled Pinyon Juniper Woodland Health, Reflections on 40 Years of Close Observation. We also, for those of you who are maybe more art-minded in this crowd, we have a couple of cool art and natural history fusion workshops coming up. So on September 22nd, we will host a talk by Dr. Leanne Woolery from Tucson, and she has a PhD actually in art-based perceptual ecology. It's a unique interdisciplinary approach for conducting ecological field research using art. So that sounds really interesting. She's gonna give a talk on Thursday the 22nd of September, and she will also be offering an eco art workshop that Saturday on September 24th. So I think we're gonna get the promotion out for that probably next week or the week after, so stay tuned. Also upcoming, save the date, October 1st, we'll be offering a workshop led by Dr. Gwen Waring. She wrote Natural History of the San Francisco Peaks. She also owns a gallery up in Flagstaff and is a painter. So she'll be leading a plein air painting and natural history workshop at Hart Prairie Preserve in Flagstaff. So once in a lifetime, we got special permission from the Nature Conservancy to be up there. I'll be driving a van leaving from Prescott, so if you trust my driving, I'll take you there. And back probably. So, and probably we won't officially announce that one until probably September. So just keep an eye, if you're not signed up for our mailing list, keep an eye on it, or check our website. Finally, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Antoine Seronde, son of Adele Seronde. And if you haven't had a chance, I think most of you had a chance to check out the gallery ahead of time where her work is displayed. It will also be open after the show if you want to or after the talk, if you want to go take another look. And the show will run in our gallery through October 18th. Does that sound right? 14th. Surprise, 14th. Don't come on the 18th, it will be closed. 14th, thank you. So Antoine was trained as an anthropologist, didn't pursue an academic career, but has done an entire list of amazing and fascinating things, which I will relate some of them to you. So he's a retired management consultant, photographer, and gardener. He has worked with a medical team in Nigeria, with a community farm development project on Navajo land, and with an archaeoacoustics research team in Egypt, which I did not get a chance to ask you about, but I'm very interested in this. So he also taught a one-term sacred garden course at Prescott College as part of a garden design project for a client in California, and co-curated the Legacy Artist exhibits at the Sedona Art Center in 2018. So he's currently working on editing. We have one of Adele's, her book, The Living Earth, Reuniting with Nature, will be available after the talk if you'd like to look at it or purchase a copy. But Antoine's also currently working on editing her final book, Pegasus on Fire, Art, Nature, and Spirit in Education, which promotes nature-based holistic education, and I'm really interested in that one too. And he's also working on writing up decades worth of independent research projects related to the challenges of adapting to environmental and socioeconomic change. So with that, I give you Antoine Seronde with his talk, Earth is Sacred Garden, Art, Nature, and Spirit.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening. Thanks for coming. This evening, what I'd like to do is just give you a little what I call the story of Adele. She's the one, of course, who's painted this. This is, as a painter, what I want to talk about is how she moved from being a painter of landscapes to being a gardener of landscapes. And then from being a gardener of landscapes herself and with her family to working with community groups and community think that what she was moving towards was trying to find ways to heal the earth, and what she really meant was healing our relationship with the earth. So I'll start with her childhood, or how she became an artist. She's at the age of 4 or 5 years old. She was already drawing pictures of people, and she liked to tell the story of how much she concentrated on people, because at the age of 5, there was some kind of a parade in the street outside of the house where she was living, and her parents said, "Oh, come on, Adele, take a look at this. It's really exciting." What has really excited her is that she had just discovered how to draw the sideburns on a little boy. And so at age 5, she was very concentrated on her drawing. Another area of drawing that she really loved was horses. And I don't have a large image of a horse, but this was the kind of thing that she did, a little horse that you can see there. She loved the movement, as well as the beauty of horses. And then there was something else which I learned to appreciate much later. She loved trees. And I'm going to show you one of the images of trees that has always been one of my favorites. It's this one here, which is in South Carolina, with the live oaks and the Spanish moss hanging off of them. And what I learned from this was that if you brown, it's all kinds of colors. You have purples and oranges, and as well as the grays and browns and blacks. So for me, many years later, she set an example of looking for the subtleties of color, not just the splash. Experimenting, and so she tried. She got fascinated, of course, by Impressionism. Excuse me a minute. I'm going to lubricate my tongue because it gets a little dry.
Speak just a little bit louder, please.
Excuse me.
Could you speak just a little louder?
Yeah, I'll try to, yes.
Need a better microphone.
Maybe if I put it a little closer to my... Let's see.
Or let's try this one too.
Let's try that one.
Do you mind holding it?
No, I don't mind.
Let's try this one now. And also, yeah, try that.
Okay.
Better?
Oh, that I think that works better. Okay. Okay, so one of the things about Adele's painting is that it actually became her spiritual practice. And if you think about any craft or painting and compare it with meditation, I imagine many of you meditate, one of the things in common is full attention, paying full attention to what it is that you're working with or experiencing. So with meditation, you're calming down all of your senses, but with painting or with gardening, you're experiencing with all of your senses. So that when she painted, for example, she would go into her studio, for example, she would sit in a chair, look at the painting she was working on, and after kind of calming down, making a transition from whatever she'd been doing outside, she'd go get her paints ready, then she'd sit down again, getting herself into a calm state and connecting with whatever the work was that she was working on. She had a similar transition process when she went out and painted landscapes. I went to Hart Prairie, for example, with her in her van. She'd open the side doors, she'd get her paints, lay them out on the ground, get a canvas out on the ground. She used long brushes so that she could reach her canvas. But again, once she had set up, she would sit and she'd contemplate the landscape, get a sense of it, in a sense, not just visual, but listening to the landscape, smelling the landscape as well. And in one of the paintings in her exhibit, it's actually Hart Prairie, but it's in November, so you've got the last of the autumn colors, and you've got the snow beginning to come across the landscape. So for her, I think of her art as her spiritual practice. In her life, she was not just a painter, but she also had a couple of other tracks in parallel, one of which was gardening, another which was poetry. I'm not going to talk much about her poetry today. I want to focus on the gardening. When she was little, again, she visited her grandmothers on both sides of the family who had elaborate gardens. On her mother's side of the family, her grandmother had a cutting garden with all different colors and shapes and fragrances of flowers, roses, dahlias, delphiniums, lilacs. That grandmother loved to make bouquets, so she was always gathering flowers for the bouquets that she would put in the house. So that was one kind of garden. The other kind of garden with her paternal grandparents, who were both painters, was completely different. It was a garden of white flowers, but with all kinds of evergreens, so that you had a wide range of colors, very subtle colors of green. And it was a different way of experiencing a garden. So my mother drew from both of those influences, as well as her own mother, who loved roses. She had both a cutting garden for roses so that she could make bouquets for the house, but she also had her own little intimate rose garden where you could just go sit and contemplate and experience it, both the fragrance, the sound of the wind, the sound of the birds, and the colors. So, out of her gardening experience, excuse me just a second. Out of her gardening experience, she came to think of gardens as a sacred place. And there are a lot of different ways of coming to that sense of the sacred in the garden. It can be just going out there, breaking away from the routine of the day and having a place to quietly contemplate and settle oneself. It can be a place of connecting with the earth through all of the senses. Another way to come at the sense of what it means to be a sacred place is special places that one visits. So, for example, for my mom, one of those places was Glastonbury in Great Britain. Glastonbury in the southwest of Britain has a lot of legends attached to it. Christian legends that Christ had come and visited there, or that Joseph of Arimathea had brought the blood of Christ to there and had blessed a holy well, a sacred well, they're called the chalice well, with the blood of Christ. So when my mother went there, she visited the garden of Chalice Well, and the cover of the well itself has the Vesica Pisces symbol on it, which is a symbol of the eternal and the temporal united. Or it's also a symbol of the sacred feminine. So she began. She went to there and sat down and started contemplating, and she felt as though all of the mythology of Glastonbury was flowing through her out of that well, and what she ended up doing was rededicating herself to gardening, but gardening as treating it as a sacred place, and what she wanted to do was to build places of beauty everywhere in the world, so that there would be some way for people to reconnect with the natural world. One of the things that she had been doing as a landscape artist, of course, was connecting with the natural world and learning from nature. There's another source of the sense of a garden as a sacred place, and of course it's in our mythology of the Garden of Eden, or of the paradise. And one of the things that interests me as an anthropologist about that is that if you think about the evolution of our ancestors in Africa, they were in ecotones, in the places where different ecosystems meet, at the edge of a forest and a savanna, at the edge of the forest or savanna and the rivers or lakes. And those edge zones are very rich as ecological systems. They have a great diversity of species, and as a habitat for early humans, they became, I think, it's as though they became part of our deep memory, so that later, as we've settled into villages and so on, we revived our memory of those original ecotones, that original paradise in the gardens that we built. So that's another source of a sense of the sacred. Out of that kind of thinking came from my mother the sense of the garden as a metaphor for the earth as a sacred garden itself. That's the title on her book over there. Now, one of the questions that comes up is that if you're talking about the earth as a sacred garden, the implication is that we're gardeners of the earth, which seems a little presumptuous. So we might rethink that in terms of by asking ourselves, what does it really mean to be a, quote, gardener of the earth? If you think about the way different animals and plants have different functions in an ecosystem, squirrels and birds that scatter seeds, for example, or the bacteria that get into plant roots and fix nitrogen, the elephants that open the savanna, keep it open by tearing up saplings that would otherwise spread out from the forest into the savanna, the bees and the butterflies that pollinate. If you look at natural ecosystems, you can look at the functions that are performed by different species in those systems. So we can ask ourselves, well, what about humanity? Long before we settled, we lived for hundreds of thousands of years in relation to natural ecosystems. What role did we play? Well, for one thing, we were harvesting seeds, we were eating fruits, so we were a seed scatterer. like a squirrel, for example, or a bird. Another kind of function that we performed, we were omnivorous, but we did hunt to a certain extent. So we played the role of a carnivore in an ecosystem where they cull the herds of the herbivores. So that's another function that humans seem to have fulfilled in our ancestral period. Another thing that we find is that human beings, or our ancestors, at least 500,000 years ago, were playing with fire. Were in fact integrated into the fire regime of many of the prairies in Africa, the savannas. And even today, if you look at how some of the people in Central Africa or the Australian Aborigines, they also participate in a fire regime. They actually, lightning will cause fires, but by burning in a controlled way, it's possible to reduce the damage of wildfires. So those are some of the kinds of roles that human beings seem to have played before we settled into cities about 10,000 years ago, or into towns, and before we really tapped into fossil fuels about the 1700s. Once we tapped into those extra sources of energy, it really accelerated and accentuated our impact on our natural environments. And when you if you think in terms of systems, if you put a huge amount of energy through a system, it will disrupt it, it'll blow it up. That's what we have been doing, in fact, to the biosphere. We've been tapping into these huge stores of fossil fuels, and that has disrupted the entire system to where we've become kind of a parasite on the system. We've become an extreme disturbance regime, as foresters call it. Some ecologists, like the Ehrlichs, think of us as a cancer. So that's the kind of role that we may be playing now. It's not a necessary role. What's been happening at the same time that we recognize our own destructiveness, is that we're looking for ways to reduce that destructiveness, to change our relationship with the natural world. So let me come back to my mother's story, Adele's story, because part of what formed her idea that we could heal our relationship with the natural world was working with community groups. One of the first community groups that really caught her attention because of their way of interacting with the world was the Findhorn, the Findhorn garden in Scotland. So what you had there is a couple and a friend of theirs who fell on bad times. They moved to a trailer park. The soil was just sand and gravel, but they were pretty devout Christians with a kind of like a Quaker meditation kind of practice. So they were taking guidance through their meditations, and pretty soon found themselves invited, in a sense, to garden, to build up the soils, turn that gravel and sand into something that could support plants, and then actually plant in it. But in the course of doing that, they continued their meditations and began to find themselves in communication or communing with the plants and the animals in the garden itself. So this provides an interest. They called those whatever it was they were connecting with. They called them the divas of the garden. If you think about it, every living thing produces or generates a bioelectromagnetic field. an energy field. We call it the aura. And if you think about it, even though that field we can be measured at about, 7 microvolts. It's a very weak field, but it's one that dowsers, for example, and sensitive people, and us ordinary folks can sense. And what people have called the Divas, or the nature spirits, might very well be our way of naming our perception of these living fields that every organism has. And one of the lessons that came out of Findhorn is that it was not just individual plants or insects or birds that they were connecting with, but it was as though there was a diva of the entire garden, in other words, like a life field of the entire garden. If you think about Chinese feng shui, you're probably familiar with the sense of qi, the subtle energy that the Chinese talk about as running through our own bodies. With feng shui, they're looking at the qi that flows through the landscape. And they're looking at a whole range of different kinds of energies that they, in a sense, are mapping with their feng shui practice in order to come into harmony with those flows of energy. So with Chinese feng shui or with Findhorn, we begin to get a sense of how we can relate to the natural world in a way that becomes reciprocal. That was one kind of example that my mother, that Adele experienced. This dry climate. So, what part of the exploration that Adele did to get a sense of what it might mean to be a gardener of the earth came through her work in Boston with the neighborhood, the Boston Neighborhood Festival of the Arts, which came to be called Summer Thing. This was back in the late 60s, early 70s. So what happened is that, Martin Luther King had been assassinated. It had created an enormous amount of tension in the town, in the city. And you had a couple of people in a city government who had really connected with this sense of frustration and anger in the larger community. Mel King was able to get the city council to free up or to allow people to use vacant lots around the city to build playgrounds or to build community gardens. And then Kathy Kane, who was one of the organizers of the Summer Thing project, also made it possible for artists to work with local communities to build some of these playgrounds, for example. So my mother was one of the people involved in creating playgrounds. And she tells a story, for example, of getting together with people in a community, deciding where they wanted to to build their playground, and then gathering a lot of materials and stockpiling them in the vacant lot where they were going to set up their playground. They went away for the weekend, and when they came back on Monday, the kids in the neighborhood had already picked up the materials and built themselves little castles, little houses, made themselves some streets, made imitation automobiles, did all kinds of things to build their own kind of adventure playground. So what the artists coming in did was simply build on what they had already done. because here it was a community that had mobilized itself spontaneously to build their own playground. And if you think about it, playing is one of the things that people do, that the children do, that it exercises their imagination. They take in what they experience of the world out there, they rework it in their imagination, and they take it back out. So the process of building a playground is a process of engaging the imagination. And what I think it does is it elicits one of the major predilections or tendencies in us folks, us human beings. You've probably heard of the hero's journey. And you know, Joseph Campbell talking about the hero's journey, which is definitely one of the metaphors for life. But there is another process, and that's what some people have called nest building, building our habitats. We are builders as well as journeyers. We're builders as well as pioneers. So today we hear a lot about people wanting to go and explore space, and others saying, well, maybe what we'll do is terraform Mars, make it look like the Earth. Anyway, coming back to the story here, what I think was happening in those communities where the kids really got active in building their own playgrounds, is that this is a natural tendency to want to build things, to take your imagination and create things. So that's one part of what my mother was learning with the Boston Summer thing. Another aspect of it was community participation. So for example, she and a series of artists, they went around different ethnic communities. So you had Puerto Ricans, and you had black folks, and you had Irish and Italian, and even some suburban housewives. You had all these different groups. They found a wall. This is part of a mural painting program. So they gave each of the different communities a segment of the wall to paint as their own contribution to this wall that was going to be a mural by the whole community. So they all got up there, and they set up the scaffolding, and they got their paint and their brushes and the buckets of paint and so on. But there was one community that was missing, and it was the Chinese community. They didn't have an artist from there. So they kept looking for one, but they went ahead and they finished up just about all of their painting, and they left one place open for the Chinese community. And one day, a young co-ed, a Chinese from Chinatown, walked by and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "We're waiting for you." So they invited her to paint in the slot that they had kept aside. And she put a great calligraphy figure, meaning humankind. So anyway, out of that kind of experience, my mother found she was working with communities, creating things together. So it was, whether it was a mural or whether it was a playground or a community garden, it was for her a model of how we co-create together, and it was suggestive of the idea of co-creating with the natural world. We do that already when we are building a garden. We're co-creating the garden with the natural forces that are there. But she wanted to go a little further. I'm going to have to go to the well. What she did is she got interested in a couple of major thinkers that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Bill Mollison with Permaculture is one of the major people redefining how we relate to the natural world. And then the other person that caught her attention was William Mcdonough and his colleague, Michael Braungart. Mcdonough is an architect and Braungart is a chemist. They wrote a book called Cradle to Cradle. And what they were doing in that book was exploring the way we have designed our contemporary industrial system and how we might redesign it in relation to the natural world. In fact, one of the things that I found really exciting about Mcdonough's work was shifting our attention from all the problems that we have, all of our environmental problems, shifting our attention or reframing that as design problems. If you begin to think about all the things that are wrong out there, it gets really depressing. But if you look at those challenges as design problems, then it can spark the imagination. Then you can begin to say, oh, what could we do? So in a sense, what Bill Mollison was doing with permaculture was similar in the sense of taking ecological principles and redesigning how we garden, how we do agriculture. He was focusing on a homestead, starting with the area immediately around it, and then moving outwards so that you had the most dependent plants close in, the ones that we have we have a sort of a symbiotic relationship with, and then you move out and further out to the natural world. It was one way of taking ecological principles and applying them to agriculture. Another key idea was the notion of a guild. In nature, when, say, if you have a fire and it's burned an area, it'll be resettled by different organisms, and they play different roles in a succession. So an ecological, a group of plants that form an ecological succession is called a guild. And one of the things that Mollison did was to take that idea of the functions of different plants, for example, nitrogen fixers, or plants that shade others, or plants that exude some kind of chemical that it keeps others away, or companion plants. All of these were ways of redesigning our agricultural systems. So the idea was to take lessons from Mollison, lessons from Mcdonough, and you take these as a starting point for how we redefine our relationship with the natural world, how we heal, not so much heal the earth, but how we heal our relationship with the earth and get that relationship back into a mutually sustaining one. I'm going to go to the well for a moment here. So at this point, there's two things I'd like to do. One is to ask you if you have any questions, and the other is to invite you to do a little participatory game, if you like. We have a white space here. We have over here a whole series of pens, different colors. And what if we were to draw together an image of a garden, a picture of a garden, with each one of us coming up and just adding something to it? Let's just see what comes out of that. It's just a way of seeing that there can be a lot of fun in working together on a creative project. So first, did you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? Because I'm going to be asking you another question after this. But yes.
Mural.
Is it mural?
That the community's dead.
Yes.
How do they resolve that interfacing, manner of speaking to each other, bringing the philosophies together and marrying them? Otherwise, you'd have these abrupt.
Yeah. Okay, so the question has to do with how, if you have all these different people from different communities working together, how in fact did they work together? Well, food really helps. So, so that's one thing. The other thing is catalysts. So a lot of these artists were very catalytic kinds of people. They like to organize and they like to get together, and so the first communication really came between the artists. And then once they had worked out the plan for it and had members of their local communities join them, then it became an occasion to have a feast. So they would spend the whole day working on it. It took them about 2 days to do the whole project. And so they had their big feast at the end of the second day after the Chinese girl came through. Yeah, but that's a good question because it's how do you get people to work together? It usually starts with some catalytic person, somebody who initiates.
From here, I take it, but when I go down to the town square and I see two groups, one on opposite corners of the square, shouting at each other, and I saw that image, and now I saw the image of their collectively working toward a goal, and I think we're misdirected in many ways.
Well, he's just described how some groups down here are at opposite ends of the commons and not talking to each other. It really starts with talking. Somebody who acts as the go-between to start the communication. Because even though people have a lot of differences, they also have a lot of common ground, and that's what you have to search for. Yeah. Any other?
Are you aware of any community permaculture gardens in Yavapai County?
I've been away from gardening now for so many years that I've lost touch. My mother was in touch with some people from the Master Gardeners program, and some of them were definitely into permaculture. Other than that, Prescott College would be the place to go to find out.
Born, and did she live in this area? Or?
Yes, she was born in 1925. She lived in Massachusetts most of her life until 1982. She moved out here to Sedona. So a lot of her painting, the family had a summer place in Maine, not far from the sea. So a lot of her landscapes back there were both forestscapes and seascapes. And then she just fell in love with the red rocks out here. Orange was her favorite color. So coming out here, she just looked at these red rocks and fell in love with the place immediately. Yes?
At what point did you get immersed in what your mother was doing, and in what way?
Well, it really started when they moved out here. They needed somebody to help them with the landscaping, moving the heavy rocks. Back then, I was a lot stronger than I am now. Later, it became when she started writing the actually not this book, but the education book. I ended up helping her rewrite some parts of that and edit it. And we're almost done with the editing. I just have to rewrite the epilogue. So. As a child?
Were you involved in her activities when you were a child?
Yeah. Okay. So, I have there's 5 of us children of Adele, and I'm the oldest. And she taught all of us how to paint. So from the time we were 3, 4, or 5 years old, we were already painting also. My 2 sisters were the ones who really loved to paint. I liked sculpture. I liked working with clay. But all of us
were involved in that sense with her as an artist and becoming more or less artists ourselves. Any other questions? Okay, I would like to invite you to come up and fill this whiteboard with color. And if you're feeling shy, I'm going to have my nephew, I've got two of my nephews, two of Grandma's grandchildren over here. And so this is Kazo. He and I were the ones who hung the show. Kazo himself is a painter. And
so, Antoine, you want us to just images of a garden, or we
just
design a photograph of a garden?
let's each of us put something on there. Here, hand me that orange. Hand me the orange over there. Okay. So I'm going to put some red rocks over here, and Kazi, you put something in there, and then each of us, anybody who would like to come up and grab one of those and put something in, let's just see what emerges. It may be awful, but sometimes it's fun.
Yeah, Christina.
Anyway, one of the things that's fun about this exercise is you do not have to know how to draw.
We got lots of markers.
Yes. One of the stories that Adele used to tell was getting ready to paint a mural with a group of children, and they whitewashed the side of a garage. They got all the paints together, and then left for the night. And the next morning, the garage was completely covered with graffiti. So the artist said, these kids are really into this. So what they did was simply start coloring around the graffiti, and pretty soon additional kids came along and put on their own signature graffiti. The entire group of kids covered that garage side completely, filling in all the empty white spaces. So I'm hoping that you'll fill in all the empty white spaces.
Are you familiar with the book Rainy
I've just been taking, my sister just gave me a copy of that, yes.
Your mother would have loved it.
Yeah, and in fact, she did get a chance to see it before she passed away.
Rainy
Yeah.
Sweetgrass.
Yeah. Braiding
You haven't read
Sweetgrass.
it, you'll
Yeah.
buy it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Like braiding wheatgrass.
Braiding Sweetgrass, yeah.
Oh, braiding.
Yeah.
Actually, she was interviewed in an NHI video.
Wonderful.
So she's wonderful. Yeah, Robert, she's great. I think it was she here physically? Or I wasn't sure if it was a remote. What? Yeah. I want to be there so bad.
photographs, and I don't.
Yeah, okay, the question was about Adele's husband and how he fit into the picture. He was a doctor, a research pathologist who did a lot of research on nutrition. So he had a great love of nature, and in fact, his great love was marine biology and exploring reefs, the coral reefs, which are absolutely beautiful, or were before they had been dried up. But so there was a lot of interaction. It was like the scientist and the artist, and both of them were spiritual explorers. So they had a lot to talk about and a lot of experiences to share with the natural world, yeah. As well as raising 5 kids. Okay, I think let's wrap this up a little bit. Yes, good, we're good. Yeah. Yes, good, okay. So we've got the beginnings of a garden here. And what you can see is that once all of you began to focus on this space and picked up your pens, you weren't fighting with each other, you were just focused on the garden. So that's one of the lessons of this kind of experience, is that when everybody's focused on something that they want to do together, a lot of the tensions and antipathies can fall to the side. Okay, I'm going to go back to the well, and then I'm going to leave you with a challenging question. You've probably heard, let me back up. We're all aware of climate change. We've had in the news have been full of the wildfires in California, the floods in Kentucky. One of the reports that I ran into several weeks ago was the World Bank and the United Nations Refugee Relief Organization predicted over the next 30 years there'll be at least tens of millions and probably hundreds of millions of people forced to change because of climate change. Already in 2020, the United Nations Relief Agency recorded over 30 million displaced people and refugees. About 70% of them were farmers leaving lands that were too dry or had been flooded. By 2021, that figure was over 70 million. I don't know what the figure is already this year, but the big question that comes to my mind is, where are they going to move to? And one of the reasons that's a big question is, if you think about the civil war in Syria that started in 2011, there had been a bad drought in the Middle East, which had forced about 1 million farmers off their land in Syria. They went to cities like Aleppo and Home, and there were no services, no jobs, no places for them to settle. So the question of where people are going to move to, I think, is one that we need to start thinking about. And what we have actually is some pieces of the puzzle. If we think of this challenge as one that we might be able to meet with green cities,
Then we can look at what Mollison was doing with permaculture, what Mcdonough was doing with his architecture, and with his redesign of the industrial manufacturing processes. We can look at Arcosanti, which is right down here, the Biosphere 2, in the United Arab Emirates, there's a place called Mazda City. It was founded by the emir there, and the idea was to build a completely carbon-free city, one using wind and solar, and geothermal as its sources of energy. So each of these lines of thinking and experiments give us pieces of the puzzle to how we are going to resettle the millions of people who are going to have to move because of climate change. And if we think about the Mollison and Mcdonough examples as ways of redefining our relationship with the natural world, that's something we build into the city, the green city of the future. We have, in a sense, an opportunity to completely rethink the human habitat. And that's the challenge which we're going to have to deal with willy-nilly, whether we like it or not. Anyway, so that's the question I want to leave with you. What are we going to do to help resettle all the millions of people who are going to be forced to move because of climate change? So thank you for your attention, and thank you for coming. And what I hope is that you take this opportunity to visit the gallery and see what Adele painted, and have a good evening.
Thank you all again for coming. As a token of our appreciation, we at NHI wanted to give Antoine this hat. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. Again, the show runs through October 14th. If it's, yay! We also just got a new hat color, so go check them out. So the gallery will be open for you to check it out afterward. The books are up here. I'll have an iPad if you'd like to purchase one, and Antoine's here for any questions. Thank you all. Have a great night.